And we are ready to rock and roll. E4, E5, knight comes out, and we have the Italian. Look at the speed at which Hikaru is making his moves. Bishop C5 for Hans, 15 minutes plus 10 seconds increment. Just adjusted his knight on F3. Knight comes out to F6 and knight C3. Not the most common way to play. Generally, white puts his pawn on C3. Niemann pushes A6. And now Hikaru jumps into the center. Seems like a line that he has prepared here. Bishop E3, very quick to play. And Hans pushes his pawn to D6. Hikaru exchanges, gives his opponent the double pawns and plays his knight to E3. Black castles here. Now, black has very good control of the center, but Hikaru seems to be very well prepared. Hans in general is confident because he understands these structures well. He goes A4 and he's trying to clamp down the queen side here. B6 played so that A5 cannot come in easily. H3 by Hikaru. He's slowly and steadily improving his position. Rook B8 played so that in future B5 can come in. And pawn to C3. Angling for a future D4 with the rook coming to D1. Queen D6 played here by Hans Niemann. It's becoming a very positional struggle here. Queen to E2. And now Hans plays his pawn to G6 just so that in future the knight cannot jump to F5. Both players getting up after their moves. Rook D1 played. And now Hans blunders big time with B5. You can see Hikaru is so quick there to take the pawn, and I'm sure he sees the tactic. Can you spot it? The tactic here is to take the pawn with the bishop, and that is an unbelievable tactic because after rook takes, you go D4. Oh, Hikaru finds it. Wow, rook takes B5, pushes D4. Now the rook is hanging. If you move the rook, then D takes E5. Rook is attacked here, and you lose a piece. So Hans has to take this pawn, but now you lose an exchange. Rook takes E4, and this is completely better for white. Knight to C4. Right out of the opening, 20 moves in, Hikaru has an winning advantage against Hans Niemann. He takes the pawn, and here he's an exchange up. Black does have an extra pawn there, but it's not going to be enough. Knight takes D5. And just rook F1 looks pretty good, but Hikaru goes knight D2 attacking the rook. And the rook enters on the 7th rank. Rook E1 played, offering a trade. When ahead in material, you can trade pieces. Hans Niemann is like, I am banking on my pawn on D3. If you take, I take back and get my pawn to the 2nd rank. He does take it. Knight B4 and now knight E1 played. Bishop comes to A6. Ooh, look at black pieces here. They look quite well placed. King comes to F8, but white is still better now. He goes knight to C5, attacking the bishop on A6. Bishop comes to B5. And Hikaru makes an error here. He goes F3, giving up the E3 square, and Hans instantly jumps in. Now the problem is if you get your king in, knight D1 comes with a check. So Hikaru plays B3 first, saving the pawn, but Hans jumps in with the knight, and now this knight takes away the crucial square from the king. The pawn takes the crucial square away from the white king. You can see Hikaru is getting a bit fidgety there because black's pieces are just amazingly positioned. Look at the bishop, look at the knights, look at the pawn, and now the black king is also entering the battle. Just shows the power of pieces here. And now Hikaru brings his knight back to E4. Black king is continuing his march there. King C6 played. It's so unfortunate that the white king cannot get into the game. So he tries to trade off, but you can't trade it because he'll just make a queen. Hans pushes his pawn to F5. He knows he's better here. He knows that he has the play flowing. Rook A8 and now knight to E3 with the idea of knight C2 seems very, very strong. Let's see if he manages to find this. Hans has 1 minute on the clock. So does Hikaru. Both have very little time. He finds knight e3. Now Hikaru comes back with the rook. Not a move that he would play happily for sure. King comes in to d5. Hans is slowly and steadily improving his position. Rook c1 and now c6 played. He could have even pushed it to c5 here. That's also strong. King can enter with king d4. At some point you have to figure out how to break through, but it must exist because white is running out of moves. White does not have the great moves there, but he rushes. He rushes into knight c2. He should have waited maybe with h5, maybe with c5, and he was winning there. Now Hikaru is back. If he takes with the rook, he's back in the game. And Hikaru now has to figure it out within a minute on the clock. But I believe the monster calculator that he is, he will figure things out that he must take with the rook. Any other move just lets the black king enter here. So he does take, knight takes, king comes in, knight e1, king d2, knight g2, all calculated perfectly. He makes a queen, chops it off, king takes. The position is now drawn because the knight is coming into the game and attacking these pawns. But how easy is it to draw? Because Hans is saying, I'm going to pick your b3 pawn and just push my c pawn down the board. King f2, Hikaru brings the king in, maintaining the balance. Still, it's advantage to black in practical terms. Knight f4, attacking the g6 pawn. He takes the pawn on c3, knight takes g6, pushes c5. Very important to bring the knight back. No, he goes g4, a blunder here because now c4 is very powerful. Extremely powerful here, and you can see Hikaru is a bit stunned there. Hans pushes and all of a sudden this pawn cannot be stopped. He takes on f5, c3. The black pawn is a monstrous pawn here. f6 played and he can stop the pawn with his bishop. He does so. Knight comes back and he's going to push it to c2. He does push it. And now if knight e2, just make a move with your king. Don't queen so soon. Yes, knight e2, play king b2. Because if king e3, you can take and it comes with a check. No, he takes it too soon. And the problem now is that Hans queens, white also queens. This is technically not so easy to win. Although it should be winning. It should be winning. Hans had a direct win there. He could have made a queen. But now Hikaru has some hopes. Ooh, he touches the queen and places it back. Plays queen b8. The pressure is mounting like anything in this game. Queen b2 check. Will Hans Niemann be able to win this position is the million-dollar question. Queen g7 check. It's not easy to coordinate your pieces because white queen will continue to give checks. But one thing that is in Hans' favor here is the remaining pawn on the board is of the color the queening square is of the color of the bishop, which really helps that in this fact that the queens if traded is a winning endgame for black. And that is a huge thing for Hans Niemann here. King c5. He plays his queen back to g4. And Hans calmly plays bishop c6. 31 seconds to him, 20 seconds for Hikaru. Pushes his pawn to h6. Queen e5. Hans has to figure out how is he going to coordinate his pieces to win here. Well, he's trying to wait. And I think it's a fun position for him to keep trying endlessly. King d6. And Hikaru plays queen b4 check. King goes back to d7. Queen to g4. He's bringing his king in. I think that's a good decision here. Just to bring the king closer. Oh, and he's found a weakness here. He's going to attack this pawn on h5. That's his plan. It's a good one by Hans Niemann there. King f7 played. And now queen comes to e4. He goes king f8. Presses the clock. Check again. King goes to g7 step by step. He's made his king safe on the h8 square in a way that there are no checks possible. And Hikaru there shaking his head. He's so unhappy. He plays queen b8 with 1 second on queen c8 with 1 second on the clock. A check. And he's losing his h5 pawn. And this is Not good news, because now Hans is completely winning, because not only does he have an extra piece, he also has a passer there. Queen a7 gives a check. King h2 and brings his king in. Hikaru keeps waiting. He's hoping for a miracle here, but I don't think that's going to happen. King g2 pushes the pawn to h5. h4, h3 coming in. Queen d7. He brings his king up. Hans is very confidently converting this. Queen c8. And now pawn push forward. Well, he gives a check. A king h1. And now just pawn to h4. He brings his queen back, gives a check. There are always technical difficulties when you have such less material on the board, but I believe Hans will be able to manage this. This is the best part about the position for black, that the queens can be exchanged. Queen e5. He comes up with the queen. King g6, playing it a bit carefully there. Look at Hans' time on the clock. Because of the 10-second increment, he's gone all the way up to 2 minutes 18 seconds, while Hikaru is down to just 13 seconds on the clock. Bishop now joins into the battle, and this is going to be curtains, because if the white queen does not continue to keep giving checks, plays queen b1, this time with no time on the clock almost, I think Hikaru has lost on time. Queen b6, and yes, he resigns there because I think he lost on time and his position is also loose.